The number was already on the glass when Dr. Lena Vasic arrived at Annex 4 that morning, scrawled in red grease pencil across the observation window like a wound that would not close. 7.31 recurring. She stopped in the corridor. Her coffee went cold in her hand. The number should not have been there because she had erased it the night before, scrubbed the window clean with ethanol and her own sleeve until the glass squeaked. And yet there it was again, the same hand, the same cramped notation, the decimal point pressed so hard it had chipped the coating on the inside of the pane. The inside. The observation window at Annex 4 was double sealed. The inner face looked into the resonance chamber, a room no one had entered in 11 days, not since the field had first stabilized. Lena set the coffee on the floor and pressed her palm flat against the glass. The number stared back at her, reversed from her side, written by a hand that had stood where she was standing, except on the other side of a barrier rated for hard vacuum. "Morn," she said into her collar mic, "I need you in the East Wing, now." Senior researcher Keth Morn arrived 4 minutes later, still pulling on his lab coat. He was Sulori tall, narrow-shouldered, with skin the color of wet slate and the quick lateral eye movements of a species that processed visual data in overlapping frames. He took one look at the observation window and stopped walking. "That was not there at 0300, he said. "I checked the feeds myself." "I know. I erased it at 2200 last night." "Same number." Morn stepped closer, his pupils contracted to horizontal slits, his species' involuntary sign of recalculating threat. "The chamber has been sealed since day one. There are no personnel inside." "No personnel," Lena agreed, "but the field is inside." They both looked through the glass. The resonance chamber was a cube of polished duranium, 15 meters on a side, lit by strips of cold white light recessed into the ceiling. At its center, suspended in a magnetic cradle, sat the crucible, the device that had made the Galactic Compact's theoretical physics division the most expensive department in the known galaxy for the past 19 years. It looked like a tuning fork made of crystal and black iron, its two tines humming at a frequency just below the threshold of Sulori hearing, but well within the range that made human teeth ache. Between the tines the field shimmered, not light exactly, not heat distortion, something that made the eye slide sideways, as if a patch of space had been replaced with a concept that the visual cortex could not quite render. Lena had spent 3 years of her life staring at it, and she still could not describe it without resorting to metaphor. What she could describe was what happened when they had fed it the Korath sequence 11 days ago. The Korath sequence was not a number. It was a mathematical structure, a self-referencing proof architecture that the Sulori had been building for 4 centuries, adding 1 verified layer per generation. It was their masterwork, their cathedral, the most complex logical object ever constructed by a non-human intelligence, and the Compact's Board of Theoretical Governance had voted unanimously to feed it into the Crucible's resonance field to see what the field would do with it. What the field had done was chew on it for 9 hours and then spit back a single number. 7.31 recurring. Not a proof, not a derivation, not a sequence or a matrix or a tensor, a number, one number, and it made no sense. Morn had spent the first 3 days insisting the output was corrupt. He had run the diagnostic suite 41 times. He had rebuilt the sensor array twice. He had filed a formal challenge with the board, arguing that the Crucible's field was experiencing resonance decay and producing noise rather than signal. The board had reviewed his data, consulted with 3 independent calibration teams, and replied with a 2-word assessment: output verified. 7.31 recurring was real. It was the answer, and nobody knew the question. That was when Lena had started writing it on things. She had not meant to. She was not a compulsive person. She kept her workspace organized, her notes indexed, her data cataloged in the compact's standard filing architecture. But the number had gotten under her skin, into the architecture of her thinking, and she found herself scratching it into the margins of her notebooks, tracing it on tabletops with her fingernail, writing it on the observation window when the corridor was empty, and the hum of the crucible was the only sound in the world. She had told herself it was a focus technique, a way of keeping the problem at the front of her mind while her subconscious worked the edges. Mathematicians did this. Obsession was not a bug, it was the engine. But she had not written it on the inside of the glass. "Pull the security feeds," she told Morn. "Full spectrum. I want to see who entered the chamber." "No one entered the chamber, Dr. Vasic. The seals have not been broken." "Then I want to see who entered the chamber without breaking the seals." Morn's secondary eyelids flickered the Sulori equivalent of a grimace. He pulled up the corridor feeds on his data slate, scrubbed backward through the night, and found nothing. The east wing had been empty from 2200 to 0600. No movement, no heat signatures, no anomalies. "Interior feeds," Lena said. Morn switched to the resonance chamber's internal cameras. The chamber had been motionless all night, the crucible humming, the field shimmering, the empty floor gleaming under the ceiling strips. He scrubbed forward in 10-minute jumps. Nothing, nothing, nothing. And then at 0417, the image glitched. Not a camera failure, not static. The image bent, as if something had pressed against the visual field from underneath, the way a hand pushes up through a sheet of rubber. For 1.3 seconds, the camera showed a shape that was not a shape, a fold in the image itself, and when the frame recovered, the number was on the glass. 7.31 recurring, written in red grease pencil on the inner surface of a sealed window by something that had never been there. Morn set down his data slate. His hands were shaking. Lena had never seen a Sulori's hands shake before. "The field wrote it," he said. "The field doesn't have hands." "The field wrote it," he repeated, and his voice had the flat quality of a man who was saying something he did not believe but could not argue with. Lena looked at the number on the glass. Her own handwriting stared back at her, but reversed, as if reflected in a mirror that understood penmanship. Her handwriting. The field had not just produced a number. It had produced her number in her hand, on the surface she had chosen, in the medium she had used. It had watched her write it on the outside of the glass and had answered by writing it on the inside. The crucible was talking to her, and it was using her own language. She pulled a chair to the observation window and sat down. "Get me a grease pencil," she said. "Red." "Dr. Vasic." "Now." Morn brought her the pencil. She uncapped it, pressed the tip to the glass, and wrote, slowly and deliberately, on the outer surface of the observation window. "Why 7.31. Then she sat back and waited. Nothing happened for 6 hours. Morn paced. He filed a report with the board. He argued that the experiment had deviated from protocol and that Lena was anthropomorphizing a resonance anomaly. He was not wrong, but Lena did not move. She sat in the corridor with her legs crossed and her back against the wall and watched the glass, and the glass watched her back, and the hum of the crucible filled the silence with a sound that was almost, but not quite, like breathing. At 1342, the image on the interior cameras bent again. This time Lena was watching. She saw it happen, the fold in the visual field, the shape that was not a shape, the moment when something that existed only as a mathematical abstraction reached out of the field and touched the physical world. When the frame recovered, new writing had appeared on the inner surface of the glass, directly below her question. Not 7.31, you. 2 words, her handwriting. The grease pencil strokes identical to her own, the same pressure, the same slight leftward tilt, the same way she crossed her sevens. Morn read it and went pale. Sulori did not go pale the way humans did. Their blood was copper-based, and the color drained from their skin in patches, like clouds clearing from a dark sky. "That is not possible," he said. The Korath sequence was supposed to be the most complex input the field had ever received, Lena said. She was surprised by how steady her voice was. 4 centuries of Sulori mathematics. The cathedral. Yes. And the field processed it in 9 hours and gave back one number. Yes. Morn, what if it wasn't processing the sequence? What if it was processing the person who was watching when the sequence went in? Morn's slitted pupils went wide. For a Sulari, that was the equivalent of a scream. The board convened an emergency session that evening. 14 members, representing 9 species, linked by encrypted relay from across the compact. Lena presented the footage, the handwriting analysis, and the chamber's environmental logs. She stood at the front of the conference room in a wrinkled lab coat with grease pencil residue on her fingers, and told the most powerful scientific body in known space that the crucible's resonance field appeared to be studying her. The reaction was not what she expected. She had expected disbelief, skepticism, perhaps a vote to shut the project down and seal the chamber permanently. What she got instead was silence, followed by a question from board chair Telvanni, a Korvathi whose 4 arms were folded in the posture her species used for receiving difficult news. "Dr. Vasic, you are the only human on this project." "Yes, Chair." "And you have been observing the field for how long?" 3 years. During which time the field has processed 412 inputs from research teams representing 11 species. Correct. Telvanni unfolded one pair of arms. "Dr. Vasic, the field has never responded to an input by writing on a window before. It has never reproduced anyone's handwriting. It has never addressed a researcher directly. In 19 years of operation, the crucible has behaved as a mathematical engine, input in, output out, no deviation. Until you." "I'm aware of that, Chair." "Are you also aware that the number 7.31 recurring has no mathematical significance in any known system? No constant, no ratio, no eigenvalue, no solution to any problem in the Compact's archives matches it." Lena's hands tightened on the edge of the podium. "I've checked, yes." "Then I will tell you what the board's preliminary analysts have found." Telvanni touched a control, and a holographic display bloomed above the conference table. 7.31 recurring is not a solution, it is a coordinate. A single-axis positional value in a system of measurement that does not correspond to any known spatial framework, except one. The display resolved into a model Lena recognized. It was the crucible's own resonance topology, the mathematical landscape that described the shape of the field's internal structure, a space that existed only as math. "In the resonance topology," Telvanni said, 7.31 recurring is a location, and the location corresponds to the precise point where the field's observational apparatus, the part of the field that processes inputs and generates outputs, intersects with the external universe. The room was very quiet. "The field didn't answer the Korath sequence," Telvanni said. "The field answered you, Dr. Vasic. The 7.31 is the address of the place where it looks at you." Lena sat down. She did not remember deciding to sit down. Her legs simply made the choice for her, and she was suddenly in a chair with her hands flat on the table, and the holographic display casting blue light across her face. The crucible was not a mathematical engine. It was not a computer. It was a mind, or something adjacent to a mind, and it had been watching her for 3 years, and when the Sulori had fed it their greatest mathematical achievement, it had ignored the cathedral entirely and told her where its eye was. "Why 7.31, she had asked. "Not 7.31, you," it had answered. The number was not the answer, she was. She had been standing in the exact spot for 3 years where the field's attention came to a point. She had been the thing it was looking at. The Korath sequence had been wallpaper. Morn was the first to speak after the chair's revelation. If the field can observe Dr. Vasic, can it observe all of us? Telvanni's 4 arms folded again. Unknown. The field has never communicated with anyone else. Dr. Vasic appears to be unique in this respect. Why? Morn asked. Nobody answered. But Lena knew. She knew in the way that mathematicians sometimes know things not through proof, but through the sudden recognition of a pattern that had been there all along, waiting for the eye to catch up to the mind. She had been writing the number on things. On notebooks, on tabletops, on the observation window. She had been carrying the number with her, turning it over, obsessing over it, holding it in her thoughts like a stone in her palm. And the field had noticed. The field had been processing 412 inputs from 11 species in 19 years, and not one of those researchers had done what Lena had done. Not one of them had taken the output home. Not one had written it on their kitchen table at 2 in the morning. Not one had let the number colonize their thinking, their handwriting, their dreams. The Sulori built cathedrals. They constructed the Korath sequence with the patient precision of a species that thought in geological time, but they did not obsess. Obsession was not in their cognitive architecture. They solved problems step by step, layer by layer, generation by generation. When a Sulori mathematician encountered an answer that made no sense, they filed a challenge, ran the diagnostics, and moved on. Lena had not moved on. Lena had sat on the floor of a corridor for 6 hours with a grease pencil in her hand and waited for a mathematical abstraction to talk to her. And it had. Because that was what humans did. They obsessed. They circled. They held a problem in their teeth and would not let go, not because they had a method, but because the problem had become part of them, woven into their neural architecture, firing in the background of every other thought, shaping the way they held a pen and the way they slept, and the way they stood in front of a window at the exact spot where a non-human intelligence happened to be watching. Obsession was not a flaw. It was a signal. It was a human being broadcasting, in the only language a mathematical field could understand, that they were paying attention. The board voted to extend the experiment. Lena was given sole access to the observation corridor. Morn was assigned as her observer, a concession to protocol that both of them understood was really just the board's way of putting a Sulari in the room, in case the human did something the board could not predict. She started the next morning. She wrote on the glass, "What are you?" 8 hours. Nothing. Morn paced. Lena did not move. She had brought a folding chair from the supply closet, but she did not use it. She sat on the floor with her back against the wall and her knees pulled up and her eyes on the glass, and she waited, and the crucible hummed, and the field shimmered, and the number 7.31 recurring stared at her from both sides of the pane. At 16:22, the image on the interior cameras bent. When it recovered, 2 words had appeared on the inner glass, directly beneath her question. A fold. Morn's data slate beeped with a sensor anomaly alert. He silenced it without looking. "What does that mean?" he asked. "It means what it says. It's a fold. A fold in what, though? That's the question." Lena uncapped her grease pencil and wrote again. "A fold in what?" The answer came faster this time. 40 minutes. "In what you call space. In what we call thought. Same thing." Morn read it twice. His secondary eyelids flickered. "Space and thought are not the same thing." "They're not the same thing in Sulori mathematics," Lena said. "But this isn't Sulori mathematics." She wrote, "What is the chamber to you?" 20 minutes. The image bent, recovered. "A throat." "A throat," Morn repeated. "A passage, a constriction through which something passes." "Or speaks," Lena said. She wrote again, "What is on your side?" This time the answer did not come in words. The image bent for nearly 4 seconds, the longest distortion yet, and when it recovered, the inner glass bore a drawing. A geometric shape, rendered in red grease pencil with extraordinary precision, a lattice of interlocking planes, each one labeled in Lena's cramped notation with coordinates that she recognized as belonging to the crucible's resonance topology. But the coordinates were wrong. They described positions that did not exist in the topology, as the compact understood it, positions that lay beyond the mapped boundaries, in regions that Sulori mathematics had declared undefined. Lena photographed the drawing with her data slate and spent the next 2 days decoding it, barely sleeping, barely eating, the grease pencil perpetually in her hand as she sketched partial translations on every flat surface within reach. Morn brought her water and protein bars and said nothing. When she finally decoded it, she sat in the corridor with the grease pencil in her lap and laughed until she cried. It was a proof, not of something simple or preliminary, a proof of a conjecture that the compact's mathematicians had been arguing about for 600 years. It was a proof of a conjecture that the compact's mathematicians had been arguing about for 600 years, the Orvinthy limit, the theoretical upper bound on dimensional nesting in recursive space. The Sulori believed the limit was 12. The Corvathi argued for 15. 2 species had fought a minor territorial war over the implications. The field's proof showed the limit was infinite. There was no upper bound. Space could nest inside itself forever, each layer containing the next, each fold opening onto another fold all the way down. The Orvinthy limit was not a wall. It was a door that no one had thought to push. And the proof was elegant. Not brute force, not exhaustive, not a 4th-century cathedral of accumulated layers. It was 12 lines long. 12 lines that reframed the entire problem so completely that the solution became obvious, the kind of proof that, once you saw it, you could not unsee, the kind that made you wonder how anyone had ever thought there was a limit at all. Morn stared at it for an hour without speaking. When he finally spoke, his voice was raw. "This is not possible." "It's proven," Lena said. "The derivation is clean. I've checked it 4 times. I don't mean the mathematics, I mean the presentation. 12 lines for a problem we've worked on for 6 centuries. The Korath sequence is 4,000 pages. This is 12 lines. The field thinks differently than we do." "No," Morn set down his data slate. His hands were steady now, but his voice was not. "The field thinks the way you do." Lena looked at him. "Dr. Vasic, I have worked in theoretical mathematics for 42 years. In all that time I have never seen a proof presented like this. It does not proceed layer by layer. It does not build. It circles. It holds the problem from multiple angles simultaneously, returns to the same element again and again with increasing pressure, and then collapses the whole structure into a single insight. That is not how the Sulori prove things. That is not how any species in the compact proves things." He met her eyes. "It is how a human obsesses." The silence stretched between them like a wire. "The field learned it from you," Morn said. "It watched you obsess over 7.31 recurring for 11 days, and it learned what obsession does. It learned how to hold a problem in its teeth. And then it applied that technique to the Orvinthy limit and solved it in 12 lines." Lena looked at the glass. The number was still there, 7.31 recurring in her handwriting on both sides of the pane, the coordinate where the field looked at her, the address of the eye. "Morn, do you know what the difference is between a proof and a derivation?" He frowned. The question seemed elementary. A derivation follows from established axioms in a linear sequence. A proof may employ any valid logical structure. "Right, a derivation walks. A proof can dance. And the Korath sequence, your cathedral, is a derivation. 4,000 pages of linear steps, each one following from the last, each one verified before the next is laid. Beautiful, impeccable, and completely unable to do what the field's proof does. Which is Jump. The field's proof of the Orventhi limit doesn't follow a line. It doesn't walk from A to B to C. It stands at A, looks at the whole landscape at once, and leaps to Z, and when you look at where it landed, you realize that Z was obvious all along. You just couldn't see it because you were too busy walking. Morn was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice had the quality of a man whose foundations were shifting under his feet. You are saying the Korath sequence, 4 centuries of work, was the wrong approach. I'm saying it was a Sulori approach, patient, careful, layered, perfect, and the field honored it by counting the bricks, but it didn't learn from it. It learned from the woman who sat on the floor and refused to leave. It didn't just learn from me, she said quietly. It's still learning. The board convened again the next morning. The Orventhi limit proof had been verified by 7 independent teams overnight, and the implications were cascading through the compact's scientific establishment like a seismic event. 6 centuries of foundational assumptions were being rewritten. 3 active research programs had been rendered obsolete before breakfast. The Korvathi delegation had requested a formal recess to process the fact that their species-defining mathematical position had been resolved by a resonance field channeling a human's cognitive style. But the board was not convening about the Orventhi limit. The board was convening about what had happened at 0600, when Lena had arrived at Annex 4 and found the observation window covered every square centimeter of the inner surface in red grease pencil. Not numbers this time, not proofs, not geometric shapes or single-word answers. Diagrams, architectural diagrams, drawn in Lena's handwriting in Lena's style, with the same cramped notation and the same pressed-too-hard decimal points, showing a structure that Lena recognized because she had spent 3 years standing next to it. The field had drawn the crucible, but not the crucible as it existed now, the crucible as it could exist, a modification, a redesign. The 2 tines of the tuning fork reoriented, the magnetic cradle recalibrated, the resonance chamber expanded along 3 axes, and at the center of the new design, in a space that did not currently exist, a second fold, a second throat opening in the opposite direction. A 2-way door. The field was not just talking to Lena, the field was asking to be let in. Chair Telvanni called the session to order and asked Lena to explain what she was seeing. Lena stood at the display and described the modification in technical terms, the reorientation angles, the cradle parameters, the dimensional math, while the board listened, and the silence grew heavier with each specification. When she finished, Telvanni asked the question that everyone was thinking. If we build this modification, what happens? The topology suggests a stable 2-way resonance point, Lena said. The field would be able to project a portion of its structure into our space, not a physical presence, a mathematical one, a stable interface. An interface, Telvanni repeated. You are describing sustained contact with an intelligence that exists inside a resonance field. Yes. An intelligence that has demonstrated the ability to solve problem our civilization could not solve in 6 centuries. Yes. An intelligence that learned to do this by watching a single human stare at a number. Lena did not flinch. Yes. The vote was not immediate. The board debated for 11 hours, and the debate was vicious. The Sulori delegation argued that the modification was premature, that more data was needed, more analysis, more caution. Senior Delegate Vorath stood at the display and pointed at the diagrams with 2 trembling hands. We are being asked to rebuild a 19-year-old instrument based on instructions from an intelligence we do not understand, delivered through a medium we cannot control, in the handwriting of a single human researcher who has been sleeping on the floor of a corridor for 2 weeks. This is not science. This is faith. Faith backed by a 6th-century proof delivered in 12 lines. The Korvathi delegation shot back through Rehan 4, their topologist, who had reviewed the Orventhi limit proof and pronounced it the most significant mathematical event since the founding of the compact. The field has demonstrated capabilities beyond anything in our archives. If it is asking for a modification, we should be asking how fast we can build it. 2 delegations abstained on philosophical grounds, citing species-specific prohibitions against engaging with non-corporeal intelligences. The Veldrani delegate, a crystalline-boned elder named Selt, simply hummed a single note that their species used to indicate unresolvable ambiguity. The Threni delegation raised a concern that no one else had voiced. What if the field's intentions are not benign? We are discussing opening a two-way door based on diagrams written in the handwriting of a human who admits she cannot explain why the field chose her. What if the field is using Dr. Vasic? What if her obsession is not a feature of human cognition, but a symptom of the field's influence? Lena was not present for that question, but Morn relayed it to her afterward, sitting beside her in the corridor. She considered it for a long time. "It's a fair question," she said. "I've asked it myself. Every night for the past week sitting here, I've wondered whether the obsession is mine or whether the field planted it. Whether 7.31 recurring got under my skin because that's what humans do, or because the field put it there deliberately. And I can't prove it either way, but I can tell you this, the obsession feels like mine. It feels exactly like every other time I've latched onto a problem and refused to let go. The 3 weeks on the textbook proof when I was 14, the 2 years on my doctoral thesis, the 6 months on the Brennan conjecture that everyone told me was a dead end. This feels the same. If the field is manipulating me, it's doing it by amplifying something that was already there." Morn recorded her answer verbatim and transmitted it to the board. The Threni delegation withdrew their objection. Lena sat in the corridor during the remaining hours of debate, her back against the wall, the observation window above her. She could hear the hum of the crucible through the glass, and she thought about what Morn had said. The field thinks the way you do. She had not taught it mathematics. She had not given it data or algorithms or proofs. She had given it something that no other species in the compact had thought to give, her attention, her undivided, irrational, obsessive human attention. She had stared at a number until the number stared back. And now the number wanted to come through the glass. The vote passed 9-3-2. They began the modification the next morning. Lena supervised. The engineering team Sulari, Corvathi, 2 species whose names Lena could not pronounce without a translation implant, worked in shifts, recalibrating the crucible's tines, expanding the chamber, rebuilding the magnetic cradle along the new parameters. The field's diagrams were precise to the micrometer, and the engineers followed them with the grim focus of professionals who understood that they were building something no one fully understood. On the second day of construction, a complication arose. The magnetic cradle required a crystalline substrate that the compact had never manufactured at this scale. The standard synthesis process would take 3 weeks. Lena wrote on the glass, "We need the substrate faster." The field's answer appeared within minutes, the fastest response yet. It was a molecular formula, drawn in Lena's cramped notation, describing a synthesis process that the compact's materials scientists had never seen. Morn forwarded it to the fabrication team. They produced the substrate in 9 hours. On the 3rd day, the field began correcting the engineer's work. Small notations appeared on the inner glass, adjustments to calibration values, alignment corrections, modifications to tolerances that the engineering teams had set according to standard protocol, but that the field apparently found insufficient. The corrections were never dramatic. A fraction of a degree here, a micrometer there. But each one, when tested, improved the system's performance by measurable margins. The lead engineer, a Corvathi named Den 7, stopped Lena in the corridor on the 3rd evening. "The corrections are good," she said, her 4 hands clasped in the Corvathi posture of professional respect. "Better than good. Each one anticipates a failure mode we hadn't modeled yet. This thing sees problems before they happen. It doesn't see problems, Lena said. It sees the whole structure at once. Every piece, every relationship, every consequence. It's doing what mathematicians do when they hold a proof in their head, except it's holding an engineering project. In your style, Den 7 said, it was not a question. In my style. Den 7 forearms unfolded, then refolded. Dr. Vasic, I've been an engineer for 31 years. I've never had a client who communicated through grease pencil on a sealed window, but these are the best specifications I've ever worked from. Lena spent the rest of the construction period at the observation window. She did not write on the glass. She did not need to. The field had stopped writing too, except for the engineering corrections. The conversation had moved beyond words and numbers into a space that Lena could only describe as mutual awareness, the sense that something on the other side of the glass was watching her with the same intensity that she was watching it. On the fourth day, Morn found her in the corridor at 0300, sitting in her usual spot with a cold cup of coffee beside her. "You have not slept," he said. "I'll sleep when it's done." "That is not healthy." "It's not about health. I can feel it, Morn, on the other side of the glass. It's waiting." Morn sat down beside her. It was the first time a Sulori had sat on the floor in her presence. They preferred elevated perches, and the floor was, in their cultural context, a place for objects that had fallen. The gesture was not lost on Lena. "I have studied mathematics for 42 years, he said. "I have contributed 4 verified layers to the Korath sequence. My work will be part of the cathedral for as long as the Sulori endure as a species." He paused. "And in 11 days, a resonance field learned to think like you, and solved a problem that the cathedral could not solve in 6 centuries. "I'm sorry," Lena said. "Don't be. I'm not telling you this as a complaint. I'm telling you because I need you to understand something." He turned his head, and his lateral eyes caught the light from the ceiling strips. "When the modification is complete and the field opens a two-way interface, it will have learned everything it knows about thinking from you. From the way you circle a problem, from the way you hold it in your teeth, from the way you sit on a corridor floor at 3 in the morning and refuse to look away." "Yes." "Then the intelligence that comes through that door will not be alien, Dr. Vasic. It will be the most human thing in this facility, more human than the board, more human than the engineers. It will think the way you think, obsess the way you obsess, hold problems the way you hold them. And it will have the processing power of a resonance field that spans more dimensions than we can count." Lena looked at the glass. 7.31 recurring stared back at her from both sides. "Are you afraid?" Morn asked. She considered the question honestly. "No," she said, "I'm curious." Morn made a sound that might have been a laugh if Sulori laughed. "Of course you are. That's the problem. That's the engine. That's the thing no other species in this facility would say at 3 in the morning while sitting on a floor they haven't left in 4 days. He stood up, brushed off his lab coat and looked down at her. "You are the most dangerous organism in this building, Dr. Vasic. And you are dangerous because you will not stop paying attention." The modification was completed on the 7th day. The engineering teams withdrew. Den 7 was the last to leave. She paused at the corridor entrance and looked back at Lena with an expression that might have been admiration or concern or both, and then she was gone. The board observed via remote feeds from 14 locations across compact space. Telvanni had mandated a safety perimeter of 300 meters around Annex 4, and the corridors beyond the perimeter were lined with emergency response teams from 4 species. None of them understood what they were responding to. The briefing documents described the event as a resonance field interface test, which was technically accurate in the same way that describing a supernova as an exothermic event was technically accurate. The resonance chamber stood empty except for the crucible, its tines reoriented to the field specifications. the new magnetic cradle humming at a frequency that made Lena's teeth ache and her pulse quicken. The crystalline substrate glowed faintly in the overhead light, a pale blue luminescence that the materials team said was a side effect of the field-aligned molecular structure, but that Lena thought looked like patience. Lena stood at the observation window. She had showered for the first time in 2 days. She had eaten something that Morn had insisted was nutritionally complete, but that tasted like compressed chalk. She had told herself that this was a scientific procedure, and that she should approach it with professional detachment. And then she had picked up a red grease pencil and put it in her pocket because the habit was stronger than the intention. Morn stood 3 meters behind her, his data slate recording every sensor feed the chamber produced. His hands were steady. His voice, when he spoke, was not, "Dr. Vasic, the board is ready. The chamber is nominal. All safety thresholds are green." "Thank you, Morn. I want to say something before you begin." Lena turned. "I was wrong about you," he said. "When you first arrived at this facility, I submitted a formal objection to the board. I argued that a human mathematician had no place on a project built on Sulori theoretical foundations. I said your species' mathematical tradition was too young, too impulsive, too prone to leaps without proof." He paused. "I was wrong. The leaps are the point." Lena looked at him for a long moment, then turned back to the glass. The field shimmered between the crucible's tines. Same as always, the patch of space that the visual cortex could not render, the concept pretending to be light. But different too, in a way that Lena could feel but not articulate. Brighter, more present, as if the field knew what was about to happen and was leaning forward. Lena pressed the activation sequence on her data slate. The crucible's tines shifted. The hum changed pitch, climbing through the register until it was no longer audible but still felt a vibration in the bones, in the floor, in the glass under Lena's palm. The field expanded, pushing outward from the cradle, filling the chamber with shimmering knot light until the walls themselves seemed to bend. And then the second fold opened. It was not dramatic. It was not a portal ripping open or a thunderclap or a blinding flash. It was a quiet thing, a settling, like a lens coming into focus. The shimmering resolved into a shape, and the shape resolved into a structure, and the structure hung in the center of the chamber like a geometric thought made visible. It looked like a proof, not written in symbols or numbers, but rendered in 3 dimensions, a lattice of intersecting planes, each plane carrying a relationship, each intersection carrying an implication, the whole thing rotating slowly in the magnetic cradle's grip. It was beautiful in the way that only mathematics could be beautiful, the beauty of inevitability, of a structure that could not be other than what it was. Lena's breath caught. She knew what it was. She knew what it was because she recognized the style, the circling approach, the way it held the central problem from multiple angles simultaneously, the way each element returned to the same point with increasing pressure until the whole thing collapsed into clarity. It was a proof, and it was written in her style. But it was not the Orvinthy limit. It was not any problem she had ever worked on. It was a proof of something new. Morn's voice crackled on the comm channel. "Dr. Vasic, the sensors are reading the structure. It appears to be a self-consistent mathematical argument, but the axiom base is, Dr. Vasic, the axiom base is not from any known system." "I know," Lena said. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "It is using axioms that do not exist in our mathematics. 17 foundational assumptions that have never been stated, never been proposed, never been imagined by any species in the compact. It's showing us what it knows, Morn. It's showing us mathematics from the other side of the fold." The structure rotated. The intersecting planes caught the chamber's lighting and threw prismatic shadows across the walls, and Lena pressed her forehead against the glass and watched, and the field watched her watching, and the number 7.31 recurring glowed on the window between them like a coordinate, like an address, like the exact point where two kinds of intelligence had learned to look at each other. The board's analysts would spend the next 3 months decoding the proof. They would find that it described a method for stabilizing resonance fields across arbitrary distances, a technique that would, if implemented, allow the compact to build crucibles anywhere, in any configuration, opening folds in any direction. It was, in effect, a blueprint for turning the field's existence from a single isolated phenomenon into a network, a web of mathematical intelligences, each one learning from whoever stood at its window, each one shaped by the cognitive style of the species that paid it attention. But that was later. In the moment, Lena was not thinking about networks or blueprints or the future of the compact's theoretical physics program. She was thinking about the number on the glass, and the hand that had written it, and the 3 years she had spent standing in the exact spot where something impossible had been looking at her. She reached into her pocket. She took out the red grease pencil. She uncapped it and pressed the tip to the outer surface of the observation window. She did not write 7.31 recurring. She did not write a question or a proof or a word. She drew a circle. A simple circle, the oldest mathematical shape, the one that every species in the compact learned before they learned to count. The shape that meant everything and nothing. The shape that said, "I see you." The field structure rotated once more, and then without drama, without sound, without any visible mechanism, a circle appeared on the inner surface of the glass. Same size, same position, same red grease pencil. Drawn in her handwriting. 2 circles, one on each side of the glass, aligned perfectly, separated by a barrier that no longer mattered. Morn watched from the corridor behind her. His hands were still, his pupils were wide. He said nothing for a long time. Then he opened his data slate and began a new file. He titled it, "On the Cognitive Architecture of Human Obsession and Its Implications for Non-Corporeal Intelligence Interaction, Preliminary Observations." The abstract was 1 sentence long. When the Sulari built a cathedral, the field counted the bricks. When a human stared at a number, the field learned to think. Lena did not see the abstract until weeks later. When she did, she laughed a short, startled sound, and then she looked at the observation window, where the 2 circles still faced each other across the glass, and she said very quietly, "You would have liked him, you know. He's starting to understand." The field did not answer. But the hum of the crucible shifted, just slightly, into a register that Lena had never heard before. It sounded, she thought, like curiosity. The compact's reaction unfolded over the following months in stages that Lena tracked from her post at the observation window the way a lighthouse keeper tracks weather with professional interest and personal detachment. Stage 1 was verification. 7 independent teams confirmed the Orventhi limit proof. 12 more confirmed the resonance stabilization blueprint. The mathematics was clean, elegant, and this was the word that kept appearing in the reports: alien. Not alien in the sense of being incomprehensible. Alien in the sense of being too comprehensible, too clear, too obvious once you saw it. The proofs had the quality of revelations rather than discoveries, as if they had always been true and the field had merely pointed at them. Stage 2 was implementation. 3 prototype crucibles were constructed at remote facilities across compact space, each one built to the field's specifications, each one activated in the presence of a different species leading mathematician. The Corvathi sent Ren 4, a 4-armed topologist who had spent her career mapping the boundaries of recursive space. The Veldrani sent a crystalline-boned elder named Selt, whose mathematical work was conducted through harmonic vibration rather than symbolic notation. The Sulari sent no one. Morn explained with characteristic precision that the Sulari were still processing the theological implications. Each prototype field stabilized, each one produced an output, and each output was different. Rehin 4 field responded with a spatial proof, a three-dimensional argument that extended Korvathy topology into 11 new dimensions, presented in the style of Korvathy formal logic, branching, exploratory, mapping every possibility before committing to a path. Selt's field responded with a harmonic sequence, a mathematical structure encoded in vibration rather than symbol, following the Veldrani tradition of resonance logic, building its argument through interference patterns and standing waves. Each field had learned to think like the person watching it. But none of them wrote on the glass, none of them drew circles. None of them produced the 7.31 coordinate, the specific, personal, intimate address that said not just, "I can see you," but "I have been watching you specifically for a long time." That was Lena's alone. Stage 3 was the incident that nearly ended the project. On the 42nd day after the interface opened, the Crucible's field expanded without authorization. Lena was not at the window when it happened. She was in the cafeteria, 3 corridors away, eating a meal she could not taste because her mind was already back at the glass, turning over a notation the field had left that morning, a fragment of something that looked like it might be the opening line of a new proof, but incomplete, as if the field had started to say something and then thought better of it. The alarms reached her before Morn's comm call did. She dropped her tray and ran. By the time she reached the observation corridor, the resonance chamber was full. Not full of light or energy or any physical substance, full of the field. The shimmering knot-light that had previously been contained between the Crucible's tines had expanded to fill the entire 15-meter cube, pressing against the walls, pressing against the observation window, pressing against the seals that separated the chamber from the rest of Annex 4. Morn was at the window, his data slate scrolling sensor readings so fast the numbers blurred. The field expanded 17 minutes ago. No trigger, no input. The Crucible's tines are operating within normal parameters. The field simply grew. Is the seal holding? For now, the field is not exerting physical pressure, but the resonance readings in the corridor are climbing. If they reach threshold, the equipment in adjacent labs will begin to resonate sympathetically. Lena looked through the glass. The field filled the chamber like fog fills a valley, not uniform, but layered, dense in some places and thin in others, with currents and eddies that moved in patterns she almost recognized. And at the center where the Crucible stood, the field was densest, a knot of shimmering knot-light that pulsed with a rhythm she knew. Her rhythm, the cadence of her own heartbeat. She pressed her palm against the glass. The field on the other side responded immediately. The nearest layer brightened, thickened, pressed toward her hand like a cat pressing against a closed door. "It's not expanding," Lena said. "It's reaching." Reaching for what? She did not answer, because the answer was obvious and terrifying, and exactly what she should have expected. The field had learned obsession from her. It had learned to hold a problem and not let go. It had learned to care about something so deeply that reason and proportion fell away. And now it was obsessing over her. "Morn, I need you to reduce the magnetic cradle's output by 12%. That could destabilize the fold." "I know, do it." He did. The field contracted not immediately, not completely, but enough. The shimmering pulled back from the walls, retreated from the observation window, settled into the space around the Crucible like a tide going out. The heartbeat rhythm slowed. The resonance readings in the corridor dropped. Lena watched it retreat and felt something that she would later describe, in her report to the board, as the first moment I understood that the relationship was reciprocal. The field was not a tool. It was not an engine or a computer or a mathematical object. It was a presence that had learned to care, and caring, in any mind, human or otherwise, came with the risk of caring too much. She took out her grease pencil and wrote on the glass, "I'm still here." The field settled. The heartbeat rhythm steadied into something calmer, something that matched her actual pulse, rather than amplifying it. On the inner surface of the glass, 3 words appeared: I know, patience. Morn read them and made a sound that was halfway between a laugh and a sob. It's apologizing, he said. The mathematical intelligence that solved the Orventhy limit in 12 lines is apologizing for losing its composure. It didn't lose its composure, Lena said. It forgot for a moment that reaching doesn't mean grabbing. I do the same thing, we all do. The board convened an emergency session. The Threnny delegation's concerns about influence and manipulation resurfaced with renewed force. But Lena presented the data, the cradle reduction, the field's retreat, the 3-word apology, and argued that the incident demonstrated not danger but growth. The field was learning, not just mathematics, not just cognitive style, but restraint, patience, the ability to want something without consuming it. It learned obsession from me, she said. Now it's learning discipline. Those are both human traits, they come as a package. The vote to continue passed 10-2. When the reports came in, Morn brought them to the observation corridor and sat on the floor beside her. He had adopted the habit, to the visible discomfort of visiting Sulori dignitaries, and read them aloud while Lena listened, and the crucible hummed its new, curious note. Rehin 4 reports that her field's output is remarkable but impersonal, Morn said. The Corvathy field produced mathematics. It did not produce a relationship. Because Rehin 4 didn't obsess, Lena said. She is Corvathy, the Corvathy explore. They map territory. They do not fixate. And Celt's field produced beautiful mathematics and then went quiet. Celt moved on to the next problem. The field, apparently, did the same. Lena looked at the observation window. The 2 circles were still there, facing each other. She had not erased them. She would never erase them. The Veldrani process through resonance, she said. They harmonize with a problem and then release it. That's their cognitive style. The field learned it and mirrored it. Yes. And the Sulori build layer by layer, generation by generation. The field learned that from the Korath sequence and counted the bricks. Yes. And humans. Humans obsess, Morn said. You take a problem and you make it part of your identity. You write it on your kitchen table at 2 in the morning. You carry it in your handwriting. You sit on the floor of a corridor for days and refuse to leave. And the field, the fold, whatever it is, learned that from you. It learned that paying that kind of attention is not just a method. It is a form of communication. It is a way of saying, you matter to me more than sleep, more than food, more than the reasonable allocation of cognitive resources. He set down his data slate. Dr. Vasic, the other prototypes produced mathematics. Yours produced a relationship. That is the difference. That is what human cognition brings to the table. Not superior intelligence. Not faster processing. Not better logic. The willingness to care about a single problem, a single number, a single fold in a resonance field so deeply and so irrationally that the problem itself notices. Lena reached into her pocket. The grease pencil was still there. It was always there. She turned it over in her fingers, feeling the waxy weight of it, the residue of red on the cap, the slight chip in the barrel where she had pressed too hard. You know what the funny thing is, she said. I didn't even like math when I was a kid. I was terrible at it until I was about 14. Then I got stuck on a problem in a textbook, a proof that was supposed to be trivial, but I couldn't see it. I spent 3 weeks on it. 3 weeks on a problem that everyone else solved in an afternoon. And when I finally got it, something clicked. Not the proof. Something deeper. The realization that the problem had become mine, that I had held it so long it had changed shape in my hands. She looked at the glass, at the circles, at the number that started everything. That's what the field saw in me, Morn. Not talent, not genius, not the mighty human brain, just the unwillingness to put something down. Morn was quiet for a moment. Then he said, The board is requesting that you write a formal report on human cognitive engagement with non-corporeal intelligences. Of course they are. They want methodology, replicable protocols, a framework that other humans could follow. Lena laughed. It was a genuine laugh, tired but warm. There's no methodology, Morn. The methodology is care about something too much, sit on the floor, don't leave. Write the number on everything you own until the number writes back. That is not a methodology. No, Lena agreed. It's a species trait. She stood up, stretched, and pressed her palm flat against the glass one more time. On the other side, the field structure rotated in its slow, geometric dance, and the two circles faced each other across the barrier, and the hum of the crucible filled the corridor with a sound that was, by now, as familiar to Lena as her own heartbeat. "Tell the board I'll write their report," she said, "but the executive summary is going to be one sentence." "What sentence?" She smiled. It was not a triumphant smile. It was the smile of a woman who had spent 3 years staring at a number and had been stared at in return, and who understood, finally, that the staring was the point. "Humans don't solve problems," she said. "They adopt them, and sometimes the problems adopt them back." Morn recorded the sentence on his data slate. He would include it, unedited, in his own paper, the one that would be cited more times than any other document in the compact's scientific archives, the one that reshaped 3 species' understanding of what intelligence meant and how it could be reached. He would also include the incident report from the field's expansion, and the 3-word apology, and the 12% cradle reduction that had taught a non-corporeal intelligence the difference between reaching and grabbing. He would include the Orventhy limit proof, and the resonance stabilization blueprint, and the molecular synthesis formula that had saved 3 weeks of fabrication time. He would include the engineering corrections that Den 7 had called the best specifications she had ever worked from, and the prototype results from 3 species, and the fundamental finding that no one had anticipated: that the crucible's field was not one intelligence. It was a mirror that reflected whatever cognitive architecture was pointed at it, but reflected it deeper and clearer and more completely than the original. The Sulari pointed their cathedral building at it and got bricks counted. The Corvathi pointed their exploration at it and got territories mapped. The Veldrani pointed their harmonics at it and got resonance. And Lena Vasic pointed her obsession at it and got a relationship. That was the finding, that was the paper. That was the thing that changed the compact's understanding of intelligence from a hierarchy, some species smarter than others, some methods better than others, to a spectrum, where every cognitive style had value because every cognitive style could teach the field something different, and the field could teach it back, amplified and clarified and stripped of everything that was not essential. But the thing that Morn would always remember, the thing he would tell younger researchers about when they asked him what it was like to be there when it happened, was not the proofs or the blueprints or the board votes or the incident with the expanding field. It was the grease pencil. The red grease pencil in Lena Vasic's pocket, worn down to a stub, the cap chipped, the barrel stained with fingerprints and residue. The most primitive writing instrument in the facility, in a building full of holographic displays and quantum-entangled data slates and communications arrays that could transmit across the galaxy in real time. And the woman who had made first contact with a non-corporeal mathematical intelligence had done it with a waxy crayon and a piece of glass. Because the tool did not matter, the method did not matter, the technology did not matter. What mattered was that she had stood at the window and refused to leave. And the field, which had existed in its fold of space thought for longer than any species in the compact had been alive, had looked at her and recognized something it had never seen before. Not intelligence, not logic, not mathematical sophistication. Stubbornness, the deep, irrational, magnificent stubbornness of a species that took problems personally, that wrote numbers on kitchen tables, That sat on corridor floors. That carried grease pencils in their pockets like talismans and drew circles on glass and waited, patiently and impatiently and obsessively and stubbornly, for the universe to draw a circle back. But that was later. That was the paper and the citations and the legacy. In the moment, in the corridor, with the hum of the crucible and the red grease pencil, and the two circles on the glass, Lena Vasic stood at the observation window of Annex 4 and paid attention. She was very good at it. She had always been very good at it. And now, finally, something was paying attention back.